Welcome to the Charter Oak Chess Club's YouTube channel. In today's video, we're going to be going over a game played by Capablanca with the white pieces against Tartakower with the black pieces. These are two famous grandmasters. One of them, Capablanca, is a world chess champion. He's known for his endgames, so of course in this game he is going to win using his endgame technique. And that's why it was the first game included in the book, The Most Instructive Games of Chess Ever Played, 62 Masterpieces of Chess Strategy by Irving Chernev. Now, this was a very popular book, and it still is, and it was published in 1965, so a lot of the games are going to be between the late 1800s and the early 1900s. So we're going to have maybe one game with Bobby Fischer, but he wasn't world champion yet. He was just kind of coming onto the scene. And yeah, but the great thing about this was we didn't have any chess computers yet, right? So a lot of these games, the annotations are going to be rather small and just about the key moves. And it's more about getting the basic ideas of chess, right? So in this game, we're going to see kind of the power of a rook on the 7th rank. So later in this game, spoiler alert, Capablanca is going to get his rook to the 7th rank, and that's going to really help him turn this game from a draw to a win. But okay, let's get into the game now. First move is pawn to d4. Black responds with f5, the Dutch defense. Now, to any of my beginners out there that are going, wait a minute, I thought we're never supposed to move the f-pawn, right? We are allowed to move the f-pawn in some cases. The problem with moving the f-pawn is it really weakens the king, right? So if we could get a queen here to play check, that could be a really good move. For example, if black's not careful, we play pawn to e3, activating the queen. And I don't know why they would play this, but if they play g5, this is already checkmate. Right? The king's in check, they've got nowhere to go. But that's not going to happen in this game because black's going to make sure to use this f-pawn to attack the center, right? Using a side pawn to attack the center. And they're going to make sure to guard this h5 square. They'll probably bring knight to f6, right? Some games you play g6 and you fianchetto, right? Another way to guard the h5 square. So as long as black makes sure to continue attacking the center, right? And not continue moving pawns on the side, they're going to be fine. And this is actually going to be a very good opening, as we'll see in a second. So white goes knight to f3. Black plays e6, so that little pawn move, attacking the center, getting the bishop out. Pawn to c4, this happens a lot. This is essentially a queen's gambit structure when you play d4, c4. You really get a lot of space, and unlike moving the f-pawn, you're not going to castle this way. You're going to castle this way, right, kingside. So it doesn't matter that you move the c-pawn because you're just getting your queen out. Your king's not in any real danger. So knight to f6, bishop to g5. So white's bringing their bishop out to pin that knight. So you can probably guess black's move here. Bishop to e7, right? If we're going to have a pin, let's break that pin, right? Because if not, I don't want to move my pawn. I don't really want to get my queen into the game yet. So let's play bishop to e7. This makes a lot of sense. White's going to continue development with knight to c3. Black's going to castle. Pawn to e3. Pawn to e3 tells me that this bishop's probably going to go to d3. Maybe bishop to e2, right? But we're probably not going to fianchetto anymore. Maybe we could have, but we're not going to do that anymore because we pushed the e3 pawn out. All right, black has two more pieces to develop. Let's see what they do. Pawn to b6. So black is going to fianchetto their bishop, which makes a lot of sense because look at all these pawns on the light squares, right? They're guarding these light squares so we can fianchetto our bishop and attack this diagonal. If we keep the bishop right here, it's just going to be hitting our own pawns. That would be a bad bishop. So we want to move it to b7. Bishop d3, we saw that coming. Bishop to b7. White's probably going to castle now. There we go. And now black only has one more piece to get out, which is the knight. It doesn't have too many good squares right now. If it goes knight to c6, this seems fine, but maybe it gets attacked with d5 right away, so maybe we don't want that. So instead, black plays queen to e8, and this is kind of the first tricky move, I would say. If you've played the Dutch before, you're going to play queen to e8. If you played the Stonewall, either the Stonewall attack or the Stonewall defense as black, you're pretty used to this idea. The idea is to get the queen onto a more active square. Queen wasn't doing anything on d8. The queen on e8 is now threatening to go this way, maybe bring the knight in, right, and start going for checkmate, or at least attacking the king side. And we can see that black has a lot of their pieces aiming towards the king side, right? Even this rook. all the way back here. So that's black's plan. We're going to attack the king side. And white plays queen to e2. Now, whenever we get to this point in the game, we've gone to our opening, right? We're developing all these minor pieces. We're both attacking the center. So those 4 center squares are really getting attacked by a lot of pieces here. We've castled. We're now in the middle game. So I like to see the middle game ideas from these grandmasters and, what are they doing and how can we replicate that in our own games? So queen to e2 is a great move. And the reason I love queen to e2 is that just by moving one square, we do a lot of things. One, we have connected rooks. So when these rooks need to get into the game, maybe an open file comes here on the C file, maybe it comes on the D file, wherever it is, these rooks are going to be ready to kind of jump into the action. The queen's going to e2, not d2 or c2, and the reason for that is more control over that e4 square, right? We have now 1, 2, and 3 attackers, and they have 1, 2, 3 defenders, right? So if we wanted to, maybe we could try to push this pawn, maybe we could take the knight, push the pawn, and just grab more space in the center. So even though it's a small move, it's a really good move, and it would probably be better than just playing queen to b3 or a3 or h3, a lot of kind of natural moves that I see a lot of beginners do or even good players do when they don't really have an idea of what they're going to play next. They just want to play anything and kind of wait for action to happen. A lot of people will just start exchanging pieces here. But instead, these 2 small moves with the queen really help both players get into the game. Black plays knight to e4 here. So this does a few things. One, this bishop is under a lot of attack now, right? We have 2 pieces attacking that bishop, only 1 defending. This knight is right in the center of the board, and it's very well defended, right? So it wasn't doing anything before, but now it's kind of posing some questions for white. So we have to do something about our bishop. We exchange. They take here, and you might say, wait, why is he taking this piece? I can take his rook. Well, Tartakower is threatening to capture Capablanca's queen. So we have to capture the knight. Black recaptures the bishop. And if we look at this position, a lot of things have changed, right? One thing that's very notable is white has double pawns. So we have 2 pawns stacked up and down. That's not so great, but these are what we call connected double pawns, which means that they have pawns to the left or right that can help. So it's not too bad. If they were isolated, we could see this could be trouble because it might be hard to advance those pawns. But where they are right now, it's not too bad, right? If black ever plays d5, we can just get rid of the double pawn. Maybe down the line we'll have an opportunity to push or take this way. So right now it's not the worst thing to have. We're just going to have to deal with that. But white has their double pawns in the center at least, right? So white is doing a great job attacking all these center squares. I think they have a really great control. Black's doing okay here as well, right? Even though this bishop is all the way in the back, it's still attacking all these center squares. They're probably getting ready to develop this knight. Is the knight going to go to f6? Is the knight going to go to d7? Is the knight going to go to a6, right? So we got some questions that we need answering. So let's see what happens next. Pawn to a4. White has a lot of choices. a4 is a very interesting one. The idea of a4 is if we don't push this pawn, what can black do? So let's say we play something silly, right? Like let's say we play rook to e1. Black could later put their queen on a3, and we see how this stops the pawn from being able to be pushed, and black is attacking this pawn, right? And now this could become trouble if the queen tries to defend. Maybe they break our castle, something like this. Anyways, the queen is just putting some pressure here and stopping white from moving their pawn up. But with this simple move, a4, the queen can no longer get to this queen side, right? So this is actually a really good defensive move by white. All right, so bishop takes, queen takes, and we should be very careful here because now Capablanca has a chance to take the black rook on a8. So is Tartakower going to allow that to happen? Of course not. Knight to c6. And rook to b1. So when we're talking about connected rooks, how they're ready to jump into the action, this rook on f1 is not doing anything. So by moving it to b1, it's on what we call a semi-open file, which means there's only one pawn when I look up and down. Everywhere else is closed, right? This is closed. This has 3 pawns, so it's very closed. So this is the file we really want to get our rooks onto because it's most likely going to open up later in the game. So rook b1 makes a lot of sense. Black moves their rook to e8. They're going to try to use these 2 rooks and start kind of pushing up the board here with the pawns. Maybe they'll play d6 to support e5 later. That's going to be hard to do where the knight is right now, but they're going to try to attack the king side. And really, this is a very even game. Both players are trying to make progress, but their opponents are both very strong, so it's very hard for any of them to get a winning chance here. And that's why this game went all the way into the end game, and it was still very even. So let's see. Queen to h3. The idea of queen to h3 is maybe to stop the queen from coming in to attack the king side. And more importantly, this queen is not in front of the pawn, right? So when we talk about moving pieces, it's not only about the piece that moves, but the piece that didn't move. And so maybe we can play f4, maybe we could play f3 and now e4, right, to attack the center. So white has some ideas here. One other idea that they have is maybe to put some pressure on h7, right? So black can't push f4 as easily as they could before. Okay, here we go. Rook goes to f6, pawn to f4, and now the knight comes to a5. This is what we call an outpost, because if black wants to keep their knight on this square all day, they can't, right? We have no pawns that can kick that knight. So that's a very good spot for the knight to be. Queen comes back to f3, so we can see the idea of moving the queen to h3 was really all about moving this pawn to f4 and taking control of that e5 square. Pawn d6. And just like before, they're able to move that d pawn now because the knight is no longer on that vulnerable c6 square. Rook comes to e1. So the rook kind of abandoned the idea of going to b1 because nothing was happening, right? Really good pawn chains here, super defensive. There's really no point in just moving our rook up and hoping for something to happen. Queen goes to d7 and pawn to e4. So the idea here is white's trying to, break open this file in the center. And so you don't want your queen to be on e7 because it's going to be in the line of fire. Capture, queen captures, and the threat is queen takes on h7. Let's see what black does. Pawn to g6. So again, this simple pawn chain really stops our attacking ideas. Pawn to g3, just keeping things safe. Right now, that f4 pawn is only defended by the queen. Queens don't like to defend pieces. That's not their job. Queens are like the strikers in soccer, right? They're supposed to be attacking. They're not supposed to be playing defense. So pawns are very good at defending themselves. Knights and bishops are good at defense. So it makes sense that we're going to play g3 here. And then all of these pawns are very well defended now. The king goes to f8. King goes to g2. And now white's going to try to find a way to attack. So they play h4. Now it kind of makes sense why we played those last few moves as white. We played g3 to keep this more safe. We moved the king up in case the rook needs to slide here. And also so that the king can defend g3, which is now the weak backwards pawn. And now we're going h4. We're trying to, break up this structure and cause some weaknesses. Okay, so black plays pawn to d5. Capture, capture. And now it's time to trade material. Take, take, check, take. And it's still even. What would you play here as white? Take a minute, try to look at the position, and try to figure out what you would play here. It's very even. All right, so Capablanca finds a very fun move here. If you picked something like rook to e1, that's okay, but we're just going to trade, right? And then the black king is going to come up the board. So white finds a very interesting idea. They play pawn to h5. And at first, this looks like a really bad move because black can just take the pawn. But if black were to take the pawn right now, our rook could simply go h1, and it's attacking the pawn. And how is black going to defend? They can't go over here with their rook because the bishop would cut that off. So this pawn is gone. And once this pawn leaves, let's say we play like this, now this pawn also becomes a problem, right? We have two attackers, again, only one defender. So it would be very foolish to take the pawn, so black has to figure out what they're going to do. They play rook to f6, which makes a lot of sense. Capture, capture, and the rook's still defending the pawn. And now, still rook to h1. It's less about this pawn, though. Maybe we'll come and attack it. But it's more about, again, getting that rook to h7. If we get our rook to h7, we stop the king from coming up the board. And black can't stop it with something like rook to f7 because we take the pawn and we pin the rook to the king. King plays f8. The rook comes over here. And now it's very hard to start playing some chess here as black because this king is supposed to be an attacker. And we're going to see how white uses their king as an extra attacker in this game. They want to bring this king up and really use it to win the game. And that's going to be very hard to do in this type of position. So let's see what happens. Rook goes to c6, attacking the c3 pawn. Pawn goes to g4. So now, if the rook were to take this pawn on c3, this bishop would now take the undefended pawn on g6, and these are two passed pawns, which means they have no pawns that can stop them. And this should be a very easy win for white. We can just see how if this pawn gets over here, we already have checkmate threats with the pawns defending all these squares and the rook coming to deliver checkmate. So Tartakower sees this and goes, this is not worth it. I can't just take that c3 pawn and allow, two passed pawns. One passed pawn is bad enough. So they play knight to c4. And now they have a fork here. Knight to e3, hitting the king and the pawn. Pawn to g5. Knight check. King goes up. Knight over here. And now this knight is, yes, on an outpost, but also, more importantly, it's defending this pawn from the bishop, right? So now this threat of rook takes c3 is a bit more interesting. So bishop takes, pawn takes, and now simply king to g3. So if we look at the material, right, which means the points, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the rook, that's 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the rook, that's 10. It's even material, and it looks like black's actually going to pick up a few pawns here. They're going to start with taking this pawn on c3, and they're going to get check. And white's okay with this. And the whole reason why white is better than black here is because they're using this rook on the 7th rank to stop the black king from moving. If that black king can't move, it's like white's playing within a whole extra piece here. So they have to make sure that this king gets around the pawns. The king wants to be over here and attacking the pawns where they're undefended. Right now, he can't do that, so he's going to have to move his king over here. And then once he gets his king over there, there'll be checkmate threats as well. So king to g3, rook takes with check, king goes to h4, rook over here, pawn up, takes. So now the rook has two pawns, but the king comes up again, rook to e4. Now, we might be saying the first time we looked at this game, why not rook takes on d4, right? This is a third pawn. Black is winning by 3 pawns now. That's a lot. And white want to get greedy and take the pawn here. They'd actually play king to f6. And what that does is now we're threatening checkmate. And this rook cannot come back in time to save it. So if the king goes over here, tries to hit the rook, we can just take a pawn now. We don't have to take a pawn. And now we're threatening checkmate. And again, what can black do? Right? They would love to just move their rook to d8, but there's a pawn in the way. So the game would end like this, check, and checkmate. So it's very important in the endgames, remember, it's not all about, just getting pieces. It's also about checkmate, pawn promotion, getting a queen. So Tartakower sees this, and that's why he plays rook to e4, which allows the rook to get to e8 if it needs to. The king still goes to f6. Again, don't get greedy. Don't play take the pawn and think, oh, I took the pawn. This is pretty good. I just want another piece. we're going to use this pawn as a barrier, right? If I put my king here, the rook cannot check this way. So the king comes over here. We're going to play check. King is now in the corner. And now we're going to take a pawn because why not? So Capablanca recaptures their first pawn. They need another pawn to keep it even. But more importantly, the king and the pawn is guarding h7, g7, f7, which means rook to c8 is game over. It's checkmate. So if you're playing as black, there's only one thing to do. Bring your rook to e8. Now there's no checkmate threat. The king now takes on f5 because this is a passed pawn. We don't want to let this pawn run, right? That'd be counterplay. We'd have to go defend that, probably bring our rook off the 7th rank. So now it makes sense for us to take this pawn. And now we go back for our checkmate threat. Rook goes over here to f4. And what would you do in this situation if you were playing with the white pieces? Now the correct move is king to e5. It's not too hard to find. We're both defending the pawn, attacking the rook, and attacking the d5 pawn. So it's a fork because we're attacking two pieces at once. Rook goes over here. You're going to try to grab this g6 pawn, this passed pawn. And what would you do here as white? So this is the very end of the game, and white plays pawn to g7 check. And yes, this loses a pawn. But again, don't get greedy. Don't try to take this pawn. Black takes here. White takes here. Now it's 2 for 1. Maybe it's a win. Very easy check. And now if rook takes, king takes. And right now black has 3 pawns, but now they only have 2 pawns and white has the passed pawn. And his king is all the way over here. So it's not going to be in time to stop this pawn promotion. So because of that, luckily black is grandmaster as well. They see this, they play king to g8, right? It's better to play this than to try to, just capture and go to an instant loss. So white's going to play a pretty normal move now. Rook takes h7. They still have this pressure here. Again, we know we can't take. Now it's 2 against 3. King is still attacking this d5 pawn. This is pretty much the end of the game, so we'll play the last few moves. Rook to g1, king takes, rook to c1, king up. They're just trying to promote this pawn now. There's really nothing to do. They don't want to exchange. And now there's nothing to do here. So if rook to c4, king over here, king to d4, and now we can just resign. And the idea is we're going to have check, king takes, queen, and now every chess player should know how to get checkmate with just a king and a rook. This pawn will not get very far. We're just going to use our rook to pick it up, and then we'll get checkmate. So this was a really good game because actually there was no problems in the middle game, right? All these moves, very, very even. Even if you put it into a computer today, it's just going to tell you everything was totally fine here. The only problem that occurred was at the very end, where Capablanca knows, hey, this is actually right about here. So let's see if we get to the position. Take. Right here, even before taking, white knows that this exchange of queen and rook is going to be good because they have that h4 move. And once they play this, it's now 2 against 1, right? So white is more likely to get a passed pawn on this side. And they're also going to get their rook to the 7th rank. And that little difference was enough for Capablanca to know instantly that he had won the game. And even though it looked like Tartakower was going to make a comeback here because Tartakower was winning by 1 pawn, 2 pawns here. Capablanca knew that this position is too good. That tactics would kind of just come out of thin air simply because this king is no longer in the attack. So it's like white's playing with a whole nother piece here. So the big takeaway from this game is get your rook to the 7th rank, And number two, play with your kings in the endgame. They're no longer these passive pieces that we've got to protect all the time. We can use the king as an attacker, which is really cool in this stage of the game versus in the very beginning where your king's a liability, right? There's a lot of ways for your king to fall for these checkmate traps, and we have to castle them and keep them in the corner. Now we have a lot more flexibility in the endgame to use our king as a piece, and we'll see that in our next game in this book, where Mikhail Tal brings his king out very early so that he can get it very active in the endgame.